Okay, so we are in. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Ryan?
Yeah, getting by, enjoying the relocation to LA and enjoying meeting, amazing people like yourself and Paul. Paul and I had a great chat the other day. Of course, you guys are producing partners.
Yeah, he's fantastic. I really love producing with him. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, he's very passionate, I think, about everything. I would love to see him like 16 hours on, on set working hard.
Yeah, he's a very hard worker. He's very passionate. I think what's also great is, like myself, we love old films. We love watching the old Hitchcock. We love how masters of the craft used to make films and how difficult it was for them because they didn't have a lot of the new technologies, and what amazing things that they did with very little money and very little technology. So we're both big fans of old films.
Old style filmmaking.
Yeah.
I think it's going to make a comeback just because it seems like there's so many talented people out there who are writing and wanting to make films like on a real budget and who just aren't getting the money that they deserve to tell their stories. And I think like this old style of filmmaking, because it's cheaper, right? It's just going to come back, I think.
Yeah, we try to use a lot of practical effects because I feel like movies nowadays, like the fact you could do a whole movie on a green screen, it's kind of sad because part of the fun of is making the mistakes. Like, oh, okay, and I know that your partner is a stunt person, so she probably has had like a lot of fun stories about what it's like to do a fight and what happens. Because that's part of the fun. Like, what crazy thing happened that actually got caught on film, which was better than you actually scheduled.
Yeah. It's what was that movie that they did the whole movie on a green screen? It was
The Jungle Book.
What?
The Jungle Book. They did that one. The new Jungle Book.
With John Favreau directed it, right?
Yeah.
And also the one I was thinking of is the 300 with directed by Zack Snyder.
Yeah.
That was huge.
Yeah, that was. But it kind of does, and and you've been on so many sets. It's fun to be around people. It's fun to like move things and have that energy. So I'm not sure, if I were an actor, like being around a green screen, like how do you, oh, I think this is coming, but I'm not quite sure where. And they're like laser pointing at, like, look here, it looks scared.
Yeah, can you imagine like reading the script for 300 and being like, "Yay, we're all going to be in Rome," and then it's like, "Nope, Culver City." Like, for months in the valley. No. But how's your year coming along so far? We just kind of finished the first quarter. People seem pretty upbeat about what's going on in LA at the moment.
It is so good to have like the industry back. It's still not quite back, between COVID and the strikes and then, fear of another strike. It's changed so much. And I think it's hard. Like, people who've been in the business for a long time, you've seen this evolution in good ways and bad ways. Like, the bad ways is like it's gotten so hard to get things made, like big things made. It's, you get funding, you lose funding, you get greenlit, you lose greenlit. And I have like story after story is like, we're ready to go. Oh, cut. It's like something happens. And so, that's why being an indie producer, you're just always, going. You just have to go. You have to keep moving forward regardless of what's happening.
Yeah, you need to have like 4 or 5 projects like ready to go at any moment because something could drop, and then it's like, well, I got to do something for the next 2 or 3 months. Like, it's funny because I'm an indie producer too, so I was making my TV show, traveling all around the world, and one of the only things that actually allowed me to produce so much content in so many years was just I was totally in control of my own schedule, and I knew that like what we could do given that amount of time, given the right budget, and someone just gave us the money, and it was pretty spectacular for a good run there.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been fun. And when you can control the schedule and also how to produce. That's the other thing is I get a lot of people who are like, well, I want to be a producer. And I was like, okay, well, you kind of have to go out and produce. If it's something small, start with a YouTube, because until you do it, it's not something I feel like you can teach. Like, you can take classes and, I've taken classes on directing and writing and everything, but until you're actually there, it's hard to explain everything you end up doing. It's like, and how it is. It's like you're constantly making decisions, good, bad, and different, but they have to be quick and you have to move things along.
I think it's actually helpful if you have OCD and you're a producer, because I just feel like you have to have so many. You have to have such an attention to detail. You have to have all your ducks in a row. You have to, anticipate problems. You're making, again, like, 100 decisions a day. and trying to let the director just, work on the story, right? And then you have to be able to manage everything around that. And it is a unique hat, but yeah, it's like you said, I don't think you can teach it. You just have to get out and do it, right?
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people said. So in the industry, because I didn't get into making projects until 2017. So I'd spent I worked at MGM Studios. I spent time working for the Irish government with their entertainment division. So I spent a lot of time, around creatives and around the creative process. But I didn't dive in until, 2017. And now we've done 2 feature films and 5 shorts. But doing the feature films, such a jump from shorts. But I feel like, and you'll probably agree with this, with the amount of paperwork to do a short is almost equal to the amount of paperwork to do the feature, because you still have, all your agreements, your cast, etc. So there's still a lot of work. It's just like with the feature, you're just extending out, 10 more days or, 15 more days. So the jump is fun. So I'm encouraging people to just, get your friends together, make a film, get it out there, and keep making films, because it's the only way you get better.
I think that's something that LA has good energy for, isn't it? Like that okay, we got no money, but we got a camera. Let's be creative and do something together. And I think that's pretty rare, because in a lot of other countries, like for example, I lived in China for years, and even in the Middle East and stuff like that, you don't have that kind of creative, let's just get out and do something and put our names on it and see if it flies, right? I think that kind of entrepreneurial filmmaking is what makes this place very special.
And I'll agree, because I've lived, in all sorts of other places around the U.S. and spent a lot of time in Ireland, and it's there is something about LA where it's you can hang out with your friends on the weekend and be like, let's make a film, and then be shooting, And again, when you do the features, you have to do the permits and all these other crazy things. But, if you're just amateurs, usually you can get away with a little bit. That's all I'll say as a lawyer.
What is it about New York? New York, you can film anywhere, and you don't need permits unless you're blocking traffic or something like that, or you're blocking off a sidewalk. I remember, because one of my friends a few of my colleagues and friends went to NYU, and they were saying how New York is such a hot spot for making amateur films and low budget films, because you don't need the big permits like you do out here. It's much cheaper just to film in New York City.
I have heard that. I'm not quite sure of the rules, but I have heard that from people in New York, where they're yeah, as long as you're not bugging people, etc. But, it's also in LA. The second you pull out a movie camera, everybody's what are you doing? Hey, what's going on? And then they're kind of in your business, or they don't want you on their lawn, or, because they're so used to the film industry, and they think every filmmaker has tons of money. So they're hey, if you're using my lawn, I want $500 an hour. And, where New York, I've heard it's very fluid. As long as you're not bugging people, they're pretty cool.
That's interesting. So where are you from originally? I'm curious to get your whole backstory here.
So I was born in Boston, so spent my early childhood there, and then moved to upstate New York, Rochester.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up in Boston?
I love Boston. I mean, there's something really, really special about Boston. The people are great. I just took my son back because he hadn't been to Boston ever, and he's I want to go to MIT. I want to live in Boston. And of course, it was during the summer, so it's beautiful and nice. So I'm the first winter he has to spend there, he may have reservations, but it's a great town.
It is. It's such a sports town too. I remember being there for a few basketball games and things like that. It's got a unique energy to it, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's very it's different than New York. New York's very fast paced, in your face. Boston's kind of sarcastic. It's a very sarcastic town. It's they're very much they're friendly, but they have an edge.
They're friendly, but they have an edge. Yeah, that's a nice way to describe it. I like that. So, what kind of schooling did you do in the Northeast? What kind of things did you take in your early days? Anything related to filmmaking?
Actually, not really. I went to Cornell. I did do some film acting classes, but I actually studied politics, and to become a lawyer, I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. So that was actually, I went to law school to practice criminal law, did it for a while, and I have very unique opinions on the justice system right now.
I bet. So you were what, 15 years old and living in New England, and you're just I'm going to be a criminal lawyer?
Well, I've been in upstate New York. So, I pretty much since I was, I think, 6, I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. That was all I wanted to do.
Is it just watching TV? Law and Order and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's true. You watch TV and then you realize, like now when I watch legal shows, there's very few that get it right because they go to trial very quickly and that never happens. Like trial, it takes you like 3 years to get, especially in LA, it takes forever to get to trial. And they're never really that dramatic because you kind of know what a witness is going to say on the stand. And if you don't, then you're really not prepared and you shouldn't be doing a trial. So, but it's interesting. I have some friends who are trial attorneys and, typically you plead out in criminal law before you ever get to it. So it's like 2% actually go to trial. So it's very interesting by the time it gets there. It means somebody's been like very, very stubborn and doesn't see like the whole picture or, really strongly believes that they're right. But typically if there's enough evidence, usually something's wrong.
Did you ever have like one of those Tom Cruise moments in A Few Good Men where it's like, I want the truth?
Like, honestly, the judge would so sanction you on contempt of court. Yeah.
But it made for a great scene in a movie, didn't it?
Yeah.
One of the best legal movies maybe of all time. It's A Few Good Men. That was good. Yeah.
Really, really did.
So so you were in upstate New York and then you became a lawyer. And then where did you practice your law?
So I went to law school in San Diego at Cal Western, and then I went right out of law school. I actually started with MGM Studios. So while I was in law school, I worked for the state's victims board. So California has a state board that helps out victims of violent crimes. So I worked there, and then you really realize what's wrong with the justice system because you want to help the victims. Like this is like everybody gets into criminal law usually like I want to help people who've been harmed by crime, but it's almost like once they go through the system, it's almost like they're beat up again. So they've had this horrible thing happen to it, and then it's like you have to relive that whole horrible thing to, police officers, to attorneys, to like what we did is we got them compensation for, hospital bills, et cetera. But then it's like you constantly have to relive this most horrible day of your life. And then at the end, the person who committed the crime will either get like, 2 years and you're like, none of it seems right at the end of the day.
It must be the like one of the least fulfilling things that you can go through as a human being, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And incredibly traumatic.
So, we see so many people and, and you can see why people have a hard time moving on because they can't. It's like they have to constantly relive it to just try to get justice. And you see these big cases of, something bad happens and then it's still like 10 years later, they're making a Lifetime movie of it or they're doing this. And you're kind of like, that was the worst day of somebody's life.
Yeah. And prepackaged for entertainment. Yeah. Not easy at all. What was it about law that kind of attracted you to it? Like, it's quite a unique discipline, right? It's not something you kind of get into accidentally.
Yeah, I think there's that whole, sense of right and wrong. When you're a kid, you believe like, okay, bad people, go to jail, good people, good things happen. And then when you're adult, you're like, oh God, none of that's right. It's like none of the, but and I talked to a lot of my friends who are lawyers about like why they got into law, because it's a great question. And a lot of them were like, we wanted to do something where we felt like we fought for the little guy. But what tends to happen is you end up in corporate law or you end up, making pleas for people. So you never really get that goal that you wanted to get when you become a lawyer.
Yeah, of really helping people.
Yeah, you never really get to help people. You get little victories, but never that big win.
Yeah, I've dealt. I have a lawyer who helps me with some of like my entertainment contracts and stuff, and that's been super helpful. And he's been great because then he kind of gets me more or protects me in certain ways. So maybe he gets that kind of feeling from time to time. But I can imagine like where someone has had like a real crime against them and it's been like a physical thing, and then for that to be dragged out for years and then not getting the kind of compensation that you deserve or fighting with insurance companies and stuff like that, that just must be terrible and endless.
Yeah, you just feel for people because, because it's like this. We've probably all have had our phone stolen or our wallet stolen or something happened to us, and you feel like, oh, you're so angry and Like, what could you imagine if something really, really bad happened and there's no closure, or the closure's just so minimal, you're like, well, you just sit there questioning everything about like why the world works in this way and why the justice system works in the way it does.
It would be so hard to find the motivation to rebuild your life after something traumatic like that.
Yeah.
If the system just tears you up and spits you out and gives you no like feeling of closure. Yeah.
Like, I had my sister, like I have three sisters. One of them actually had a fire in her house. Her house burned down. She ended up being in the hospital because she was saving her pets, which, I would do the same. And the firemen are like, no, don't do that. But you go back for your pets.
You go back for your pets, yeah.
So and then what I have to say is, what was great, insurance company's not great, but like Amazon, she had just ordered new furniture. They sent her all the same furniture, didn't charge her. The community came together, helped her, And so like sometimes you see the good side of the world. And that was one case where it's like, I've seen all this bad side of the world. So I just wanted to do a little shout out to the good people of Rochester, New York, Gates Charlie, who helped my sister Tina. So thank you, everybody.
I think where you do find bright spots in the U.S. is where the community does come together, like when there has been a tragedy or something bad like that. Because I feel like inherently, I've traveled around the U.S. quite a bit, right? And I feel like the smaller the town, the more local, the more tight knit the community, the more kind of wonderful the people are. Because in the big city, everyone's kind of shitty with everyone else because we're all protecting our little corner of our careers or whatever it may be, But small town people in the U.S. are just brilliant.
It really is. And I mean, when you've lived in big cities and you and then go to communities, you're like, everybody does know everybody, which is good, has its good and its bad. But it's also like, if something happens, you're going to have this community come and help you, which, because I was trying to think, well, if it happened in LA, would you have gotten that kind of support? And you're kind of like, well, it depends on where in LA. It depends on all these different factors, but there is just like community coming together, which was really amazing.
I don't even know my neighbors in LA. Like, I've seen a few faces, but like, you don't really make that connection, right? Because everyone's just busy doing their own thing.
Yeah. I've lived in my build. I bought a condo and I've lived there, I guess, oh God, how many years? Like, I don't know, like 14 years. And so like I know my neighbors, but then again, people are transient. So like the people who've been there, like I've known, and then like new people come in all the time, and you tend not to run into them until they're like, hey, the elevator's not working, or hey, do you know how to fix this? Because you've lived here.
Yeah. You become the local expert.
Yeah.
So how do you go from graduating in criminal law and wanting to help people to then working for MGM, one of the largest studios in the city?
Yeah. So in law school, I was doing focused on criminal law, and actually I did an internship at MGM. So I did the internship, and then when I graduated, I went right into the studio. And most people are like, well, you can't go right into the studio. You need like 2 years, et cetera. But, because I had interned, I got very lucky. So then I went to the studio, and that's when studios were studios. They had that, they made films, they made TV, it felt so genuine, like they really spent the time to make quality programs. Because now you feel like, oh my God, there's a new $100 million movie out that came out within like under a year, and it's going right to Netflix, and you don't feel like there's that big releases and like that anticipation, like, oh wow, this huge movie's coming up. And it was really good to be there during that time, because we did the Bond, so it's like, who's the new Bond? It's like all those exciting things that you feel like people used to get so pumped up about.
I think actually it's interesting you say that. I really feel like the only people who are like really making like old style movies that are really big and good is the Bond franchise people and Tom Cruise. Like everyone else is just kind of, going with the flow. Like I just feel like a lot of stuff's put out that's just not good.
Yeah. I mean,
Christopher Nolan maybe too. I mean his stuff is.
But he said he was retiring. But I guess, he's something like he got $100 million bonus on Oppenheimer. So I think I'd be like, okay, time to retire.
I read something that he wants to make a horror movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hey, Christopher, if you're listening.
Yeah, it's strange. I really think and too, it's strange like how content that comes out in the streaming universe is just so much different and with so much less fanfare and so much less marketing, and it just feels so strange. Like to take for like Roadhouse, right? The remake of the Patrick Swayze movie, Jake Gyllenhaal, huge star. Then they had that guy from the actual fighting, Conor McGregor, right? So two huge stars, but they did almost no press for it. They didn't have like a huge release. Like I really feel like when Tom Cruise puts out a movie, it's an event, right? And like, you know, they go all around the world, and like they do a, you know, they launch it in Rome, they launch it in Tokyo, like they really do it. But some of these movies, they just come out with like a whimper, and it's so strange. Like you know, people put 18 months of their lives into this thing. It costs $100 million, but it just kind of comes up in an app being like, new movie on Amazon, check out, you know, the Prime tonight or whatever. And it's like, where's the fanfare?
Yeah, and it's so cool that you mentioned Tom Cruise, because I often think of like, who are the last great movie stars? Like traditional, like Tom Cruise is a movie star. He's like, you know, when he goes places, people are like, I heard at the Oscar luncheon, even like Meryl Streep and all these people were like, I want to meet Tom Cruise. And, you know, and he's amazing to like be in a room with. I heard him speak at a Producers Guild event, and he is so energetic, so kind. You know, he's like, and so like, he's like, I want all of you to win. I want all of you to, you know, and that it's that nice feeling like, hey, yeah, let's lift each other up together versus, you know, being the bucket of crabs where everybody's like trying to tear people down. So it's good to feel like that movie star presence.
Do you know how far ahead of everyone else you need to be like, I want everyone else to win also? He's on his own planet. It's always but too, like Clooney, Brad Pitt, you know, like if there's very few people who have like gone through like the system. But it was funny because I felt like I was speaking with another person a couple of months ago here on the podcast, and they had made a documentary for Netflix, right? And they were just saying like how different the studios treat you as a filmmaker versus the streamers, because the streamers are all about data, they're all about numbers, they're all about subscriptions. You know, when does this come out? How many subscribers did we get, you know, in the 30 days after that, viewership? But I feel like, and then they were saying also, but then when the studios wanted to make films, like they really made films and they crafted relationships. They really spent time and energy like on human power, I think was the big difference. And it's funny how like this is all just shifting now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it is, and I know there's like Netflix has a formula of what they want to see in 1 minute, 7 minutes, etc. And then, you know, they always want to end on that cliffhanger because it's like, oh, continue watching. You're like, okay, Netflix, I wasn't going to spend 4 hours watching something, but you got me.
I really like, actually, just on a total aside, I really think what Netflix has done in the sporting world has been incredible. Like with F1, with tennis, with golf, they've really, and even the Indy cars now in the U.S. Like I really feel like these documentaries are really quite nice. But I feel like where it comes to like making really good feature films that are like award contenders, I feel like, I don't know, there's still a lot of room to improve maybe.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes when they get the really good ones, like we watched an animated film called Nimona, which was got picked up by, I believe, by Netflix, and it was such a good film, and it's kind of geared towards. It's a little touch of anime. It's a little touch of, you know, these different types of animation, but it's got like a great, you know, love story between two guys, which is great for kids, you know, to see different people doing different things and having different love stories, which often, you know, when you're Disney, you don't quite get that. And it's natural, it's synergetic, and it was such a good, brought my son, and he really liked the whole, you know, different types of story. And some of them are just so brilliant, but I hadn't heard about this film until like I got invited to like a Producers Guild thing to watch the film. And I'm like, this is such a great film. But because it was on the streamer, it didn't get all that big Disney press. It didn't get that. And I feel like there's so many great films out there that just don't get the buzz that they deserve.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. It's hard, yeah. Because, I mean, you really have to go through the film festival circuit to get the attention, I think, that so many of these films really deserve, right? And then, of course, the film festivals are just starting to come back now after it being closed for 2 or 3 years or having limited releases and limited audiences. I mean, I was at Cannes last year. That was quite exciting. That was a lot of fun. I'd love to go back someday, you know, with our actual project instead of just kind of hanging around the fringes.
Yeah, but, I mean, it's fun regardless. It's like Sundance. It's fun just to be in that energy. But one thing I found about the film festivals, which is how they've shifted, it's a lot of they're now like, oh, you have to have the big star, or you have to have, where before it was like about the film. It's like about being independent. You didn't need the big stars. Like these independent films broke those big stars. And it still seems like they're very focused on like, oh, who's the big person who's going to come and promote the film, and that's the one I want in it. Even though there might be this amazing film over here, but they're like, oh, well, it doesn't have this big name in it. So there's something that I feel about film festivals that have kind of moved away from the true heart, and people say that a lot about Sundance. It kind of moved away from the true love of film to kind of a more commercial. So, I'm hoping that they kind of shift back and start to realize there's a lot of great filmmakers out there who need the break, who want the chance, who are super talented that, can't get George Clooney to come and do a walk-on role.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because at Cannes, it's pay to play, right? So there's the actual film festival, which is judged by the jury. And then there's the big Hollywood budget movies that just come in and pay to have the red carpet and have the screening, right? And they're not part of the official selection of the Cannes Film Festival, but they're doing all the marketing. Like when I was there last year, Harrison Ford brought Indiana Jones there, right? Obviously not part of the festival at all, but with all the media there and everyone congregated there, Harrison Ford shows up and they do a screening of it, and then it loses $150 million.
Yeah, because I was so excited about that because obviously, growing up with Indiana Jones, all of them except the Crystal Skull was a little weird, but then seeing the new one and you just are like, oh my God, this is going to be the best film ever. You're excited. Like you got a preview of it. And, Harrison Ford could like paint a wall and I'd still watch it because I think he's an amazing actor. But something didn't click and you couldn't figure out what didn't click. 'Cause the writing was good, the acting's good, but then there's just something that didn't click. And I can't put my finger on it, but I really wanted to love the movie. And
it just didn't. It fell flat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those intangible things that make, great movies, right? It's really hard to put your finger on it sometimes, but there's some magic in there somewhere.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just, and it's like this. And I say nobody sets out to make a bad movie because let's face it, we know like the process. It can be a great script that becomes a bad movie. It can be a horrible script that becomes a great movie. It can be like, there's so many variables that come in. And like Paul Thomas Anderson once said, like he was watching films with some people and somebody's like, oh, this is an awful movie. It's so horrible. And he pulled the person aside and he's like, don't say that because somebody, like a bunch of people tried really, really hard. Say it's not my taste. It's, I see where they were going, but, to trash somebody else's. And like a lot of trolls come out there and like anytime a film comes out, just trash it for no reason. And you're like, well, you got to step back because a lot of people did a lot of work to get there. And sometimes you don't have like $200 million to, make a movie. You have $2. So, but if you can make a movie on $2, you've done a lot. That's a better accomplishment than making a movie with $200 million.
And probably will be better.
Yeah.
I think I had a comment with Paul the other day where we were chatting and he was saying, I was telling him like every critic should also at the bottom, where they have their name or their byline, they should also have like which projects they've made themselves, right? Because I think like, if it's so easy to criticize other people, but if you've actually made something, then maybe you have the right to pick apart, someone else's passion project or someone else's work. But if you haven't made anything ever and you've never risked that, then had that feeling of like flying by the seat of your pants on someone else's money, and like that's just the best feeling in the world. And for someone who hasn't had that experience, like to be a critic, I think is pretty tough.
Yeah. I think, and I do think the better movie critics are those who have made movies because they understand where the director is going. Because sometimes you have a vision and you just can't execute it due to money, due to time, etc. I mean, we've been to like, we have 5 minutes left to shooting before we get kicked out of a place. Like, what can we do in 5 minutes? And, it's like, so you're scrambling to try to just get a shot to finish the film or, and that's the life, I guess, of indie production.
Always very challenging. So when you came out of school, you went to MGM. I mean, were you doing entertainment law then?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
doing theatrical, like business affairs type.
That's great. So, but it's and at that stage, did you totally give up on criminal law?
At that stage, I gave up on criminal law. Yeah.
Much happier, I guess, in the entertainment space, perhaps.
Well, it's like my friend says this, and I want to get this phrase right. She's like, criminal lawyers are civil lawyers are criminals. And what the problem with working for a studio is you see these people who have given their all to film. And then you're like, okay, we're going to find every way never to give you a dime for all the hard work you did. So in the way that the studios write these contracts, they're not for other, until you get like really big and then you have the ability to negotiate. But when you're in smaller, it's like, well, you want to get your movie made? Okay, well, you're going to make 10 cents. Like my friend had a film that actually went to Sundance, won the grand jury award, and she was a producer, and she's like, yeah, when I calculated how much time I spent on the film and everything, she's like, I probably made like $2 an hour. And
oh my God,
that's like the reality. And this was a film that did well, not huge commercial, but, did well, performed well. But the amount of time it actually takes to get a project made, it's really scary when you start like calculating how many hours.
Yeah. And a lot of times you don't pay yourself properly for those early days, for the development, for the pre-production, because you're doing that kind of pro bono, just trying to get something up off the ground so that you can make money later, but it almost never kind of comes back. That's why I think so many people here are so focused on like fees. Like everyone wants to get a project off the ground, and everyone knows how much everyone's going to make, over a 16-week shoot. Everyone has their weekly day rate and all this kind of stuff. No one's playing for ownership or equity in projects anymore. Everyone just wants to get paid so they can walk away, because they know how futile it can be, watching those royalties come in, or not having any royalties come in because some broadcaster or streamer or studio kind of robbed you at some stage.
Yep. And that's why, and I'm glad you said you had an attorney, because often people come to me after they sign a deal or after everything, all hell has broken loose, and they're like, can you fix this? And you're like, maybe, because sometimes look, you signed an agreement that you probably shouldn't have signed, but it would have been so much easier if you just had talked to, sometimes, people call me and I'll be like, just don't sign the agreement, hire somebody. Maybe it doesn't have to be me, but please hire somebody to look through, because, lawyers are there to protect you. It's like agents and managers are there to make you money. And, they'll stop at a certain point when they realize, okay, I get 10% of this money, I don't need to negotiate for more. Where lawyers are like, no, you should negotiate for more because there's more pie there. And once you get successful, you deserve that pie. Everybody deserves that pie. And it's just important to, have somebody else, even if somebody else look at it, just to protect yourself.
Especially and it's funny, when creative people tell stories and put them out into the world, you think it's insane that they don't get some kind of royalties on that, right? Because when you think about how hard it is to be a freelance storyteller, where you're working on your own, you're producing, you're directing, you're acting, but you're freelance. No one's paying you a salary, for the whole year. You're only working on a project for 2 weeks or 30 days or whatever, and then you're unemployed again, right? And if you're not getting something back from those projects, the moment COVID hits or the moment there's a writer's strike or an actor's strike, you'll lose your home. That's how tight it can be if you're not managing the back end of these projects efficiently, right? And that's obviously what you kind of help people do or have done yourself. I mean, but it's terrifying, because when those moments do come and you don't have even that little bit of income coming in, it can be horrifying.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people felt that during the strikes, because it really, coming off of COVID was so hard for the entertainment industry, and then to have a huge strike afterwards. And I remember reading this article, and I wish I could remember the person's name, and I apologize for not remembering her name, but she was an EP on the Umbrella Academy, and there was an article that came out in the LA Times. So in January, Umbrella Academy, huge, lots of viewers, huge, et cetera. And then she's like, by December, I was driving Uber. And you're like, how can you have this hugely successful show, and, later that year, you're driving Uber to make, because nothing has happened for 9 months. And you saw so many amazingly talented people that this happened to. And it wasn't just the actors or the writers, but I have a lot of friends who are on crews and stunt people and things like that. It really decimated the industry that year, especially after 2 years of COVID. like last year was the year like nobody wants to talk about entertainment.
So I did have a chat. I did have a chat on the podcast with one gentleman. He runs a production services company, and he made a killing during COVID because he was like, the percentage of the budget for the films that were made during COVID, they had to have like a 30% like COVID preparation like cushion, and he was making the plexiglass things. He was making the, I think he was even involved in like testing and all these like, all these things that you had to have on set to comply with all the COVID restrictions, and he was doing that, and he made a killing. I mean, the first few months when everyone locked down, that was tough, but then after that, he pivoted well, and had a good run with it. But everyone else suffered.
Yeah, we did our a horror film, like a horror heist called Immortal Thieves: The Bloody Heist during COVID. So we shot during COVID, which again, yeah, that increased your budget by 30%. So you're paying for testing, you're paying for a COVID officer, you're paying, and you felt it. Like you really did as an indie producer. You really felt like, okay, I'm paying somebody, like $400 just to check people in and check people out every day. And, and so that's like whatever, like $5,000 extra. And then the testing, and, the testing wasn't cheap. It was like 200 person. And then you had to pay people to test. So it's just, you saw like all these budgets going up very rapidly due to COVID. And, it was crazy. That's all I can say.
And having like none of that money go into actually like telling the story, right? Or yeah, it's pretty rough. So what came after MGM?
So after MGM, I did competitive intelligence for LexisNexis, which is a large legal company. They do a lot of data, like legal cases, et cetera, research function. And then from there, I started business school at UCLA, and I started working for the Irish government. So I ran basically the Irish government's different than the U.S. So they encourage entrepreneurs. So they have an organization called Enterprise Ireland, and it's basically a venture capital firm, and they invest in companies up to 500,000 euros for companies to grow and then, export. So I handled entertainment, telecom. So we'd invest in production companies, telecoms, and we'd help bring them into North.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. And then these were Irish-owned companies.
Irish-owned companies, yeah. So it was a lot of fun. So, worked with the guys from Once, which was, a great Irish film that's now a musical and like blew up large. There was also a lot of great animation companies that are doing really, really well now. So it was so interesting because they're storytellers, like, as a country of storytellers. And when I tell you they're storytellers, you could go into any pub and hear a great story. Like the stories are these, imaginative. And that's why you see a lot of great films coming out and winning awards. And, it's just that history of storytelling.
Yeah, there's a real passion for it. There isn't. I mean, didn't they make, Ireland and Northern Ireland, but didn't they make like all of Game of Thrones in Northern Ireland as well? Like, the crews, all the passionate people, like they really put their heart and soul into being part of the creative process. I think it's quite special.
Yeah, if you go up there, and it's great to go to Northern Ireland and you see Game of Thrones, they did Vikings. So there's a real community and culture there. And now they do tours but it's so like, people are so passionate about it and work so hard. And so I'm just giving a little shout out to Ireland and the film community because, go watch an Irish film.
It's pretty spectacular, actually. They've punched well above their weight on the global scale, I think.
Yeah, especially this year. So, they had a lot of great actors, great films.
Right. Cillian Murphy is Irish too, and he won the Oscar for Best Actor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he's very talented.
So what did you do after working for the Irish government?
So after that, I did a lot of consulting. So, as consulting with European companies, helping bring them in the U.S., and then started filmmaking in 2017. And then I still hold my law degree, so I still have clients that I've had for years. And
What made you want to start telling stories and start making film? That seems like a big leap. Like, one second you're helping entrepreneurs get funding from the Irish government, expanding business operations into other parts of the world. And then the next moment you're like, I'm going to make a movie.
Yeah, it's actually, how like people are like, okay, there's something that happens in your life and it just changes the trajectory of everything. So actually in 2017, when I started, I was actually diagnosed with a brain tumor. So, and it was they said it was the size of a golf ball. So, and this was one of these things. So I had brain surgery and I'm fine, and it wasn't cancer, thank God. But, at the time they don't know that until they really, have the surgery. So you're thinking like, God, if I only have like 5 more years left on the world, what do I want to accomplish? So it kind of goes to like, why did I come to LA? What did I want to do? And I came out here, to make films, to be part of the film industry, which I had, but it wasn't part of the film industry on the creative side, which I wanted to do. So that kind of spurred me to, hey, it's now or never. So that's kind of what happened.
That's terrifying. A golf ball size in your head. That must have just been like life-changing.
It is, because you realize, the stress of the world. And like LA can be a very stressful town because it's very like, as you said, like you can be on top of the world one day, you can be on bottom, and there's like no, it's not like other cities. You just kind of keep going. And, this is like a crazy place to be sometimes. But, when something happens, and I've had friends, who've had, things happen to them and they're like, okay, what do I really want to do with my life? And the only regret I have is I didn't start making films 20 years ago. That's my regret. So all these, teenagers out there, start making your films now.
Yeah. To come here to be part of the creative process and then to forget about that for a decade or so while you're just grinding, making a living, having a family, doing whatever everyone else is doing, and then having that realization like, oh shit, I haven't made anything yet. That can be quite motivating, I hope. Yeah,
and I think, and you've been a creative most of your life, and you realize like it's a grind in a different way. Like when you're creative, you're like, I just want to make something better. Like you just always want to be better than your last project. You just keep wanting to be better. And the only way you get better is to keep making. But sometimes you're like, oh, I have no money to make things. But then you're like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. And you're constantly like balancing the world.
My at the end of every season, my biggest fear was always sitting down with my cinematographer, my director of photography, and being like, okay, how do we make the next season better? And of course it was always about gear, right? Like, and the thing is, the gear has changed like so much over the years. Like you can imagine, in 2010, you would have to hire a helicopter for, $2,000 an hour or more, or whatever that would be. And then now you just buy a $500 drone that shoots in 4K and you can fly anywhere. That has changed. That has changed the travel space in a massive way. Like I wasn't making feature films or anything, but we were, we had a nice little travel series going, and being able to tell stories from the air, be able to look at that nature and kind of put people in that place is just, it was a game changer.
Yeah, and we had a drone we used, because once you have a drone, you're like, I'm going to use it in my film. I don't know how I'm going to use it, but I'm going to use it somehow because they're so much fun. You're just like, and then you start watching films and you see now a lot like on the whatever movies of the weeks or the lower budgets, there's always a drone shot because somebody has a drone. And before that would have been a helicopter. It would have been super expensive. But now there's always like, that drone shot of the car driving down some wooded forest road or something because somebody's like, I got a drone, got to use my drone.
We got to the point where we wanted aerial photography so much, but some countries are just like, absolutely not. Yeah. And then they force you to buy stock footage off of someone who's like close to the prince or something like that in some country who has like a stock agency, right? And then it's like an automatic client, like just no drones. We only give a drone license to one person. They shoot the entire country and then they charge you, 5 times more than it's worth. And they lock it down. That was very frustrating. I can't remember which country that was, but that was a real pain in the ass.
Yeah. I did business in Brazil, and there was, it's a very interesting, but it's the same way. It's like, oh, okay, you want this business deal. Okay, you got to pay this person 10% because he's the brother of somebody who's going to help you with the government. And and for me, I'm like, you have to think of it. It's like paying an agent. you got to just pay the 10% and like move on and do the deal. Otherwise, like once you start trying to unwind it, it will drive you crazy and it will kill a deal, because I'm like, that's just how they do business.
Yeah.
And, every country is a little different. And whether you agree with the policy or not, want to do business there, this is what happens.
And the more high and mighty you are, the less you'll get anywhere. Like it's true. I mean, I lived in China. Like you have to grease people. You have to, in China, we call it like guanxi, right? You have to like build friendships, build business relationships. You have to take people out for dinner. You have to entertain. You have to do all these things because that network of people is how you get things done. And it's the same everywhere. But here it's really frowned upon, actually. And I lived in Switzerland briefly as well, and it was really frowned upon there too, because I guess people just expect everyone to do the right thing all the time, which never happens. Like in a developing country, in a third world country, that never happens. Like, you have to learn to play the game if you want to get anything done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think, going places as an American, like we don't ingratiate ourselves to other cultures often. We're like, well, this is how we do things here. And it's like, we're in another country. We need to learn how they do things. And there's often reasons why, they do things a certain way, because, culturally, they need to feed families. They need, maybe you're greasing this person's palm, but, they're helping a community over here. So, it's like, we don't understand everything. So I always think, and you've traveled, you're a world traveler too. So, you just got to kind of work within the parameters and understand other cultures, because they do things that way for a reason.
Yeah. I remember we paid like $5,000 once for a permit in some country in Africa. I won't name it. And yeah, that money went straight into someone's pocket. Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah. But it's like sort of like I like in LA, you have to get like 2 film commissions you have to work with when you make a film in LA.
This is great, actually, because I know nothing about how to make a film in LA. So
yeah, and it's so funny because, their website's a little clunky. And so you always end up calling, and they're always super nice there. And they're like, yeah, the website's bad. And you're like, you guys know it's bad. It's like, you're in LA. There's lots of web designers. So you're going like, okay, that is what it is. And we had to extend 2 days because we were during COVID. Somebody was off site and got COVID. So we had to extend 2 days. So it's like called, and they're like, oh no, you got to fill out everything again. I'm like, fine. We shot a film in Glendale. So I got to give big props to shooting in Glendale. So we had gotten a permit and I needed another 2 days. And so I call up the film office and they're like, oh yeah, we'll extend it. It's going to be like $100. Where in LA, I had to pay another like $3,000 in 2 days. So it's like there's these pockets in LA that are great to film in. And Glendale was absolutely amazing. Like people were super excited to see a film there. So it felt like more like a community of people like, oh yeah, we want to support film here. Where LA, it's challenging. Like you got to get a lot of permits. You got to, like, if you're on the streets, you got to do a lot of, you got to let this person know and these people know and, post everywhere that you're going to be filming. But Glendale was super great. So shout out to Glendale.
Maybe the next new great destination, in the suburbs of LA.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think LA is it's just inundated with filmmakers, right? So they just get so many permit requests and so much things that they just keep jacking up the price just to keep the numbers down, I suppose, right?
Yeah. And, and what's sad is then what happens is, you have these runaway productions. So then people go to New Mexico or Arizona or Vancouver or, all these other places to film. And you're like, this is the heart of the film community. We should be like helping people film more. We should be like constantly filming. It shouldn't just be like these huge projects that can afford to film. It should be, because when they film, like we're giving $300 million out to, tax credits and stuff, they're gone like day one to like the Netflix, Disney, and Amazon and all of those. And you're like, okay, this like 1% goes to indie filmmakers. And those aren't even like, those are top indie filmmakers. They're not like the people who probably really need the money.
Yeah, no. But how great was it to see Walter White drive his Pontiac Aztec through Albuquerque, New Mexico?
That was great.
It would have been different if he was driving around in the Hollywood Hills, right?
Because sometimes the setting, and I love that, Vince Gilligan did Breaking Bad in New Mexico and did all of that, because it's like there's all these places that like the city takes on. Like everybody knows the personality of LA, just like we're talking about Boston but Albuquerque, like how many people have been there? I've been there. It's actually a really cute town, but they got a real great essence, and it made it feel very real.
I wonder if they're happy that they're now associated with Breaking Bad forever.
It's tourism. It's just like, like we're talking about Game of Thrones, like not a lot of people go to Northern Ireland. It's like, but because of Game of Thrones, a lot of people are going there now. So it was great for tourism, just like Breaking Bad. People like, it's associated with, Walter White, but he's kind of like, an icon now. And, so people are going there because they thought that it was cool.
During COVID, I was sitting in Istanbul. I got stuck in Istanbul for 4 months during the first lockdown for COVID. And I had my amazing team, and we were just like, okay, guys, like we got to get back to work, right? So let's get into Europe, and we'll just film in Europe. What can we do in Europe? Okay, Extreme Treks was one of our series where we like climb mountains and stuff. Okay, we can do a little bit of that. But I was like, we need to create another show where we can like hang out with Michelin star chefs and drink at certain pubs and get to meet people along the way. So we created this new show called like The Nomad. And one of the places we wanted to film was Dubrovnik in Croatia. And everyone had said, don't go to Dubrovnik, don't go to Dubrovnik. It's overrun with tourists. Just pop it. Yeah, there you go. But
it's like a big beer.
yes, yeah. I actually had a friend on here, and we just drank whiskey because he works for Glenfiddich, and he brought in a whole bunch of whiskeys, David, and we just had a bunch of drinks the whole time. And by the end,
we had a bunch of Irish whiskeys next time.
That'd be fun. But everyone was saying, oh, don't go to Dubrovnik because that's where they filmed Game of Thrones, and that was King's Landing, which was the capital. And the amount of tourists that go to Dubrovnik on the cruise ships and stuff like that, and they go there just specifically for that, to see like the shame steps, and people are like, and everyone there is promoting Game of Thrones, so everyone's like, don't go there. But then when COVID hit, there was like, now is the time to film in Dubrovnik because it was empty. So we went and filmed in Dubrovnik for like 2 weeks, and it was completely empty. And the people there were so happy to see us because we were like the only film people who had come back. So it was pretty wild being in Croatia, filming at this like super famous location that was completely ours. It was really lovely.
Yeah, it's like, and that was the sad thing about COVID is you wanted to travel and then you couldn't travel. And that's like, I remember taking my son to like Vasquez Park, which is, where they did the Star Trek. It's those kind of slanted, like, red mountains. And we get there, and the park's closed. And I'm like, how can you close a park? It's like, and then a couple of people were jumping the fence, and my son's very like, no, we can't break the law. He wants to be a police officer. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll go. I'm like, I'm going to respect that. I'm not going to make my kid break the law. But, it was like, it's a huge park, yet it was closed.
Is it a national park or?
Yeah, it was a national park. They closed a lot. They also closed the beaches in LA. They were giving people tickets for walking on the beach, like a $250 ticket for being on the beach in LA during certain parts of COVID.
That doesn't make any sense.
It's outdoors. It was like, it's kind of like you close the beach, you close the park. It's like you finally get to enjoy all those things in LA you never have time for, and they're closed.
Yeah. The policy. Well, we could do a whole podcast just on that. But okay, so you have a major health scare in 2017, and you're just like, fuck it, I'm going to start making movies. Yep. So how did you even make that transition? Like, how did you figure out what movie you wanted to make? How did you figure out where to find partners? How did you figure out where to raise money? Like, because all those things would have been new, right? At that stage.
Yes and no, because I had been in the film industry, so I knew all the like logistics of making films. So, like all the legal background, all the process of making films. And, in LA, you have a lot of film friends too. So as we started out small. We did the Producers Guild. You used to have this competition. It was a great competition, but it's like shoot a film in a weekend. So I highly encourage everybody to do that, because if you talk about like how to get things done super quickly, it really gets you. So we did this short film. It was called The Same Conversation. And we did not win the award, but it got like a lot of great film festivals. That won a lot of film festivals. It's still on Amazon. It's still making money on Amazon for a short film. Is kind of crazy, but and then you kind of get the bug. And then once you get the bug, you're like screwed, because that's all you want to do every single moment of the day is make a film, make a film, make a film. And I love being on set. So from that, we did another one called The Great Conspiracy, which is another short. Then we did a feature film, which I directed, which is Bottle Monster, which was a psychological horror film, which is on like Amazon and Vudu and Tubi and Roku and all of those. And then we did another short, Goldenrod, and another short I can't think of, and then did the feature one, Immortal Thieves, The Bloody Heist, which is coming out.
Amazing. That's a pretty epic track record, shooting through COVID to get all that stuff done too.
Yeah. COVID made it hard.
Yeah,
It really did.
I mean, what it was like at the beginning, kind of coming to realizations that like people aren't just going to give you buckets of money.
Yeah, and I've had a couple bad experience with investors, things that I had a really bad experience with someone, and and that was hard because, you bring in people for a project, you're excited, you have the money, they sign agreements, and then the money doesn't show up, and then everybody hates you. And that's kind of what happens, because they're like, well, I'm not getting paid, so now you're the bad guy, even though it's like, wait a minute, I have all these contracts, this person like breached their agreement. Then, and then you're like, wow, you start to realize who your real friends are when you start making films. Because when you make films, nothing ever works out the way you want it to. Sometimes it's better, but sometimes it's just like hell in a handbasket, and you have no control. And
None whatsoever.
None. And then you're just like, and you realize like people are your friends. It's like this. People who understand filmmaking and are your friends get it. Like if something falls apart, they're like, yeah, it sucks, but, hey, call me for the next one, you'll get something done. And, then you realize a lot, of LA, they want to be part of the success, but not part of the failure. And you really need the people who are going to be part of the failure, because then they should enjoy this success. If they know that like, hey, yeah, this failed, this was horrible, this went horribly wrong, but, you fail enough, you succeed. And nobody really out of the gate makes that. Like, we go back and we watch, Paul and I, we watch like George Lucas's first film or Steven Spielberg's first film. Watch anybody's first film, and they're not like, oh my God, terrific. None of these big films were their quote unquote first film, because they had student films, etc. And I think it's important for people to watch those, because it's like, this is what this person did and this is what they're doing now. And it's a process.
And there's an arc to that success. It just doesn't happen overnight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, like, when I was building my team to make these adventure TV shows all around the world, I had my director of photography who had been with me for a long time, Chad Ingram, amazing cinematographer. But I was always looking for like someone to work with him, right? And the way we shoot is super loose. Like, we're like, if you were to make like a modern day super successful comparison, we would shoot kind of the way like Larry David does Curb, but we would do it out in the wild. So we would have like a very loose script of what we expect to happen, but it would be very, very loose. There would be a lot of improv. There'd be a lot of just like, oh, this is happening, let's do this, like let's film this. Because when you're out in nature and you're walking 10 or 15 miles a day and you're up in the mountains, like you don't know what the weather's going to do, you don't know anything. So when I was looking for someone to be my second cameraman or my second cinematographer, people wanted to see scripts of what we were going to do, and people wanted like a day-by-day account of what was going on. And I was like, no. We're going to go to Kyrgyzstan, and take a 18-hour car ride into the mountains, and then we're going to walk for 12 days. And I have no idea what's going to happen out there, but you got to be up for it, right? And I think there's a huge disconnect between people's expectations of like what they think should be happening and then what really happens. And it took me a really long time to find someone who is just like, I don't care what we do every day, I just want to be part of the creative process, and we'll roll with the punches and make sure we get our 46-minute episode done by the time we leave the mountains. And like having people who don't have anxiety because it's not scripted or because it's not like perfectly planned, that was really hard for me to like find people to break through that, because I really think it is a barrier. And sometimes in the entertainment industry, you'll find someone in their in their late 30s or 40s who have worked in entertainment and then it has to be like this, it has to be like this, but it's not always, and they sometimes they lack that like mental flexibility.
And I think that's such a good point, because one of the things that Paul Overecker and I do when we're making films is we often like to bring in stand-up comedians, because we brought like Andy Forrest into Immortal Thieves, and he would just throw lines at the end. And we're like, have fun with it. Because at the end of the day, you're making a film. It should be freaking so much fun. Everybody should be having fun. That's what like Quentin Tarantino is like, we're here to have fun, make a movie, have fun. But often comedians, they just have this like, the one-liners he would throw are hilarious, like better than anything I could ever write. And that's the fun of having those people who are fluid, because it's never, I have never had a production day go exactly how it's planned out. Never in my entire life. I don't know if you've ever had it, but it's like, I think even on those $100 million films, they can storyboard it and plan it out, etc. But, something always happens.
I think you're right. Like improv people, comedians, like people who can roll with the punches and just keep coming out with lines, or keep that energy up too. Like this is super, super helpful when things aren't like perfectly scripted out and you're kind of trying to do the best you can, before the sun goes down. Because once the sun goes down, you're done. Yeah. So, I mean, how has your transition been? I mean, you're now like a filmmaker. You're no longer a corporate lawyer or entertainment lawyer, although you are bringing those skills into producing and stuff like that. But how's the transition been? I mean, was it everything kind of you thought it would be, or has it been a totally different experience?
Yeah, I still do practice corporate law and entertainment law, because that's like, I still have clients. I still do that. But in terms of filmmaking, has it been, you realize how great it is and you realize how hard it is. And I think people don't understand. Like, I think people go into this with like, it's going to be all fun and games and I'm going to like make, so much money off my first film. And there's very few people who like break through. Like one of the films we just watched was Talk to Me, and I don't know if you've seen it. It's a horror film. Brilliant. It's by these two Australian YouTubers. But they had made so many hours of YouTube. They had like millions and millions of followers, and it's a brilliant indie horror film. They were supported by the Australian government, and it was a breakaway hit. Like I think they made it for maybe 8 million. It's made like 92 million. And people are like, well, wow, that's their first time filmmakers. And you're like, well, not really, because they spent like, 7-10 years on YouTube making it. So the crazy thing about filmmaking, and you'll agree with this, there's no overnight success. Anybody who's been successful, like 10, 15 years, like you go to these, like I go to a lot of the Producers Guild, which if you're a producer, absolutely join the Producers Guild. They do so much for producers, like education, etc. But they have all the Oscar nominees talk about the process of getting their film to, be nominated. And they're like, well, I started this 20 years ago, or I started this 10 years ago. There's never, well, I think the shortest I ever heard was somebody who's like, yeah, I started it like 5 years ago. And that's crazy, because if you really realize how long these people like take to make these brilliant movies, then you have a lot more, I guess, compassion for how hard it is to make a really great movie, because it is hard.
I love Jordan Peele's story, because he made Get Out for like $1 million and it made like $100 million. And yeah, he'd been in television for a decade, and he'd been around production and stuff like that, but never made like a feature film. And then I was listening to one interview, and it was so hard for him to raise $1 million to make a feature film coming out of like comedic television. But it turns out like he's a genius.
And and this is like a great story too on partnerships, because he had written the script, or had been working on the script for like 7 years, and he kept putting it down, and his wife was like, no, you need to do this. Like, you need to do it. So having somebody else there to encourage you is so important, because there were probably so many times, and, he talks about it, where he put it away, but his wife's like, nope, you got to bring it back out over this 7 year, and made one of the most brilliant. Like, there's so many nuances in that film that people don't even realize. So if you really study that film, it's truly brilliant. I mean, I am so glad, like, he took that chance, and I'm so glad people backed him. And, they're benefiting from backing him because now he's helping other people too, which is important, getting, like, I mentor people, I work with a lot of young people because it's like, you need somebody to, like, help you sometimes. Like, because when you're going up in your career, it's always good to have a mentor. It's good. Like, I had a mentor at the PGA, and he was great. And, like, one of the things he said, Steve, one of the things he told me, it's like 12 hours equals 5 minutes. And this is the best quote ever, because then people, they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, to get 5 minutes of film, it takes 12 hours. And people are like, no, it takes like an hour. You're like, no, really? It takes 12 hours to. And then once people know that, they're like, wow, that's really hard. And you're like, you got to switch cameras, you got to switch lights, you got to do that. Because people think that it's just like, oh, I hold a camera and, get the whole movie in an hour and a half. And you're like, no.
It's way more miserable than that. Yeah. That's interesting. I haven't heard the 12 hours to make 5 minutes call before, but yeah, that's totally right. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, when we go out and shoot for 10 or 12 days, we'd come back with like 46 minutes of content, but we would only use maybe like 1/10 of all the stuff we shot. Like that's how ruthless it was, like with the editing and going through everything. And because we would always be trying things as well, like, oh, let's try to do something here, and then if it's backlit, you don't really notice it maybe. And then when you're looking at it later, it just looks awful because you're in the nature, right? We're not bringing lights out there and we're not setting things up the way you would, on a scripted content where you have like an actual location. So yeah, I just remember, how hard it was to sift through all the footage and pick out all the best stuff. That was always very time consuming.
And heartbreaking, because sometimes you feel like, oh my God, this is the shot, it's going to be brilliant, and you're filming it and you're like, oh, this is going to be so great, and then you get back and you look at it and you're like, oh, it was backlit, or it was like, oh, I thought I looked good, but I look like, I have 3 heads in that, or whatever. And that's heartbreaking, because sometimes the best stuff is like horrible.
And the thing you think it's going to be throwaway ends up being brilliant.
Yep.
Yeah. Those surprises are spectacular. So like, what are you working on now? I mean, like it's 2024. You've got a bunch of shorts behind you. You've made some feature films. What's on the horizon moving forward?
So we have a few horror films on the horizon. One's a Christmas-based horror film, because, you can never have too many of those.
It's the best when people die during the holidays.
So, yeah, but yeah, a lot of fun stuff that we have on the horizon. So, it's like spend a lot of time writing scripts, rewriting scripts, putting scripts in a drawer, saying I hate you script, and then I have probably about 10 scripts that are in constant reworks, and it's true, because and especially when you write horror, because I wrote a script a few years ago that's one of my favorite scripts about the Day of the Dead, and I've rewritten that now probably 20 times. And because things change, what people want to see, like I know I just read this Warner Brothers report, it's like, it's all about jump scares and less about plot. And, but then, in a year, it's going to be all about plot, less about jump scares. So, audiences change. And what's great is audiences are so smart. And I think a lot of times I watch movies and I'm like, no, your audience is really smart. You need to give them more credit than, a random jump scare to just get them in there. Like, I feel like people do want story. I feel like it's all about story. So when I read these reports going like, oh no, they just want jump scares and they're less about that, and I'm like, really? Like, who are you talking to?
It's funny. I think like studios and broadcast partners and stuff like that, like they have people in these positions and they get paid to write stuff like that. But they have no idea what's really going on, and they don't really get the fact that the audience will respond to quality at every turn. It doesn't matter what beats you have in it. If it's high quality, if it's made with passion, and people in it all care about what the final product looks like, it's going to get eyeballs. It doesn't matter what your media report says about, a certain amount of frightening moments or a certain amount of deaths every 6 minutes or something like that. Like, all that is just complete garbage, I think.
Yeah, like I saw Five Nights at Freddy's, which my son loves the horror game. We love playing that. And what I loved about it, and I'm blanking on the director's name. She was brilliant, but she brought this backstory to these characters that was so intense and brilliant that I was like, wow, I want to know her thought process of, because she was also part of the script writing, because that's a game about pizzeria comes to life and there's all these jump scares, etc. And when you watch the movies, yeah, you have some jump scares because that's fun. But you also have this great story about like that really had these wonderful arcs for people. And it's always, I'm always fascinated when they take existing intellectual property and then create something brilliant. So that's a film that I thought really thought about it, and that's what I like. I like to see these horror films that people really, really thought about the different characters, thought about like, how can I make this fun to watch?
Yeah, because like we all know what happens in Scream, and they're making like what, a 7th one now. So how hard is it to create original IP and just scare people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I did a Final Destination marathon last summer because I've always liked, the Final Destination series, because it's like, yeah, what if you screw with death and then death comes for you? And they always have these very interesting deaths through it. But I think they're coming out with a 7th. But, it's like you can always tell whoever watched Final Destination series because they don't drive behind, log trucks. Nobody else.
Oh, really? What is Final Destination? What is this series? I've never seen it.
Oh, Final Destination, it's basically a bunch of teenagers, and one of them, like, it starts like on an airplane, and one of the kids has this premonition, and he's like, we need to get off this airplane because it's going to crash. So he grabs some of his friends, they get off the airplane ends up crashing. So they've cheated death. So now death comes for them in all sorts of weird ways. And in the second one of the series, there's this premonition this woman has about a car crash where this logging truck, the logs start falling off the trucks and this big car accident happens. And so she skirts death again, and then it follows. It's a very interesting series because it always has these crazy, weird deaths. So
is it popular in the United States?
Yeah, it's been very popular. It's been gone. It's probably like 15 years since the first one, and now they're doing like a 7th one. So they had some new directors coming in for the 7th one, but it's been a very popular horror series.
I always liked the zombie apocalypse movies. I don't know why. I heard the series as I started watching them during COVID. Like, what's the Walking Dead? Obviously, is the big one. But I've started actually watching some of these like Walking Dead spin-offs that they've got.
Oh, yeah.
The one with the guy with the crossbow, like he's all in France, like just trying to save someone in France, and it's just so lovely the way they kind of branched out and did all these different things, but kind of kept the main premise the same. And the quality like jumped a ton for some of these spin-offs. So I've been enjoying watching that.
Yeah, because it's always like I think it was 28 Days Later, it's like it's actually back to Cillian Murphy. No, was it him? Yeah, I think it was him.
That was Danny Boyle, wasn't it? Yeah,
Boyle, okay.
Yeah. Oh, Danny Boyle directed, but Cillian Murphy was in it, I think. Yeah.
Okay. And I love that one because the zombies were fast.
Yeah.
It was like it turned the zombie things were always like, oh, zombies are going to be really slow and I can outrun a zombie, no problem. But all of a sudden, these zombies had super speed. And then all of a sudden, you're like, holy, I'm not going to run this super speed. Zombies are kind of flipped it. And I like when they take something like we've always have these preconceived notions like zombies are slow. And then all of a sudden, oh no, zombies are fast. And it kind of turns the head on like the zombie apocalypse. Because I know like after COVID, people were like, oh my God, this is an apocalyptic type of world. And we kind of think about it. Like the streets of New York were empty during COVID. Like you could go down the 405 and be the only car. There is something very apocalyptic about what happened. And then they said after COVID, nobody wanted apocalyptic movies because people feel like they live through.
That's true, and it's just it'll just make people anxious and like remembering that trauma.
Yeah, like communal trauma of that.
Yeah, it's those strange times. I mean, I was just trying to travel internationally during that time was miserable, just because I think at the beginning everyone was like rooting for everyone else to stay safe and whatever. And then, of course, it became very political. And if you have this, you're not allowed to go here. If you have this vaccine, you can't go to that country. Your country stayed open. You're not allowed. None of your people are allowed to come to our country. We closed. Like I was dealing with this for years, and it just became impossible to plan for any productions like internationally. Because you think about it, like so, like when we make TV, like we have to make volume, right? Like that's how we make money. Like you can't make 1 hour. 46 minutes, of TV and give it to someone. Like that's not how it works. So we always had to make 8 or 10 episodes, and that meant like we had to be able to plan at least 8 or 10 months in advance, and we had to know countries would be open. We had to know that we would be able to go into that country and do things, and yeah, it just became an absolute nightmare because every single country reacted differently, and then the nitpicking in between countries about this or that or which vaccine or which test or just was miserable.
Oh yeah, like my niece got married in Aruba, and I know we had to do the COVID test before, but I have to say, like Aruba, I wish I almost filmed there. The people are like so friendly there. When they say that's the happiest island in the world, I'm like, I don't know what they're drinking in that water, but everybody was so nice. But again, we had to be like test before, test after, And she had, you plan a wedding. She planned it before COVID. And like by the time it came around, it's like, okay, you're in. And this was 2001. So it was kind of like, they didn't really want to push it at that point because you will lose your deposit and all these. And the hotels were pretty good, but, you just want to get married. So we all went. We had a great time, and it was interesting. Just like you were saying, the protocol. So we had to find, and they were super helpful there, but other countries weren't so like easy to travel in and out of. And I did some travel during COVID, but I feel like I lost 2 years of traveling, and that.
Yeah, absolutely. I had actually, this is funny. I had someone in LA like 3 months ago cancel dinner with me because they were going to a wedding a week later, and they didn't want to get COVID. And like they were just like canceling, like this is 2024, and they were canceling like public events and things like that, like because they were so nervous about. Because I don't know, I don't really pay attention to any U.S. news, but I think there was like a COVID uptick in December and January, right, where some people had symptoms of the flu or something like that, and they were so nervous about that because they saw in the news that someone actually canceled dinner with me. I thought that was pretty surprising.
Well, I do feel like COVID became like the excuse, in LA when it rains, you never want to go anywhere. So people were like, oh yeah, I think I might have COVID. And then all of a sudden people like cancel at the last minute because that's a very LA thing to cancel at the last minute.
I think maybe he just didn't want to see me at all. Maybe that was just the excuse.
Uh-oh. Whoever it is, go have dinner with Rice.
Absolutely. So, I mean, like, so as you look out for the rest of the year, you've got a couple scripts you've got, like how do you decide, where to direct all your energy? Because you've got, you got a couple scripts in the drawer, you've got a few productions maybe that you think you can get off the ground. Like, what is the differentiating moment where you actually can put yourself wholeheartedly into a project?
That's a great question because one of the things, like my producer, Marjorie DeHey, and I, it's like often we're like, we pull the trigger and then like, okay, we're going to shoot in 2 months. Like all of a sudden there's just this one day where we're like, we're going to shoot, we're going to figure it out, where, a lot of other people take this like long period of time. And so part of it is like, I should spend more time in post-production. I should spend like more time. But, I feel like there's also this go time, where we're like, okay, we have 3 weeks we can, take off and film. So often I wish I could say I'm this huge planner, because normally in my life I'm this huge planner, but somehow with film it's like just the right elements come together and you feel like you have this little window of opportunity. So, over the summer we hope to film something, which, we should know by now, but like, again, it's after you do it a few times, how quickly you need to move on things. But it's also like if you don't move, then it doesn't happen. So it's a little bit of a, if this piece happens, then this piece happens, and this piece happens, and sometimes it just all comes at once.
It's funny because I had my own production company before COVID, just Ryan Pyle Productions. We just made my own shows and stuff like that. But it was funny, like how important deal flow is, because like we did some commercial projects for some tourism bureaus, then we were doing something for the BBC, then we were doing something for Discovery, and then back to BBC. But all the while, we got some cash flow coming in, and this cash flow will cover this pre-production cost before we get paid from this broadcaster to do this. And having this deal flow was always super helpful because it allowed you to kind of keep the momentum going and going and going and get things off the ground faster, get them into a position where you can get money back faster. And I always felt like watching producers make feature films, it must be really kind of challenging because you don't really have deal flow, because you can really only make one movie a year, like if you're making features, and And then it feels like once that movie's out into the world, it's almost like having to start right from scratch again to get the script ready, get the fundraising ready, plan a production. It just seems infuriating.
I think that's probably the best description I've heard of it, because you always have, and this is like most producers. Like I had a friend, and he Randy, and he worked on the Meg and then Meg 2. Great, brilliant producer, and he's like, yeah, you always have 10 projects, and I mean these were movies that were big and made a lot of money, and he's like, yeah, and then I have 10 other projects. Who knows what's going to go at any given time, because you could write the most brilliant, like, say, vampire movie, and then all of a sudden there's a flood of vampire movies, or there's this superheroes. All of a sudden superheroes were great, and superheroes, it's so hard because they do have this up and down, and if you look at the industry, like they're really popular and then not popular and then really popular. So like they're starting to dwindle in popularity because, God love Disney and Marvel. I just feel like it's been super saturated. But
super saturated, yeah.
Yeah. You want to see something different after a while. So you never know what's going to be hot. And I think that's why you have like 10 scripts ready, because once something like pops, then they're like, we want 1,000 werewolf things. And so,
this I'll try to say this as least controversially as possible, but one person's career who I really admire, their professional career, because of not just because of the quality of their productions, but also because of the way they scheduled and planned and shot, but is Woody Allen. So, for 40 years, he had a movie come out at the Cannes Film Festival every May, every single year before COVID. And I just loved it. Like, he always had a script ready. He was always casting. Then he was filming. Then it's out at Cannes, and by then he already had the next script. And he had this just rhythm, and he always was able to find the money. Like, and he didn't try. I guess historically, there are rumors that he didn't pay people like super well. But then everyone was winning Oscars off of the writing that the roles that he was creating for all these people. But I just love that, like, that he could have a script ready, go into production, have something out for Cannes, go into production, have something out for Cannes. And for 40 years, it was like clockwork. And I'm just thinking, like, no one has a career like that, because it's so hard to raise money to get the right script in front of the right people. But he created his own ecosystem, which allowed him to be kind of ruthlessly efficient in his creativity. And I always thought that would be like, because I love to plan, I'm a little OCD, and that like rhythm is like super natural for me. Like, that's how I would want to do it.
Yeah, and I think, and again, I've lost a lot of respect for him given everything. So I'll leave that aside. But in terms of the planning and the just meticulous like nature, I think that's, it's about that. Like, you just have to keep risking it and doing it and going forward and moving forward. And I think that's the business. It's like when you stop, it's like a shark. You gotta keep moving forward or you're dead.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, he's a an iconic filmmaker. Obviously, his personal life is something totally different. But from that scheduling perspective, I always kind of respected that. Yeah, not easy, but it's hard to talk about people in film now because you have no idea what they're doing in their private lives, and this could all come back to haunt us in like 4 or 5 years, right?
Well, yeah, and I think it's good that all of this, because I was in a studio system that did not treat women very well. I'm just gonna come out and say that because I was at the studio where it's like, it was okay for people to say things, and you kind of got this like shield where you're just like, it kind of flows off because you want to be successful. Because if you're the person who says something, all of a sudden you're the bad person. You're the troublemaker, and I think that's the problem. I think a lot of women in film, kind of got branded, like a lot of actresses were trouble, etc. And then when this comes out, it's like, wow, what were they dealing with? We didn't even know. Like a lot of the dark side of, or Quiet on the Set, the dark side. I don't know if you've seen this documentary, but it talks about Nickelodeon and the Nick kids and everything the Nick kids went through. And then when you hear this, like all this horrible stuff that happened to the kids, we're like, we owe like Amanda Bynes an apology. We owe Britney Spears an apology because these young women and young men, because a lot of the young men also got treated horribly. And you see that and you're just like, wow, like why wasn't anybody standing up for these kids? And you're like, because it became so hard to stand up for people. So what I like now is people are willing to stand up for other people, and it's not going to impact their career like it did. Like, it's okay now to do the right thing in the entertainment industry, and it should have been like 20 years ago. Now it is, and it always should have been. So this is what I like about all this stuff coming out is it's like, it's okay to stand up, and we should stand up. We should do the right thing. We should support everybody. I love how like the streamers have really embraced just everyone. Like, you've got an interesting story, come on in. You know, you've got a different perspective, come on in. And that wasn't how it always was. So I really like how Hollywood has kind of become different. Really like, hey, yeah, if something bad happens, tell us. We want to fix it as producers. We don't want bad stuff to happen. Where before, like a lot of times, like, well, that guy's really famous, we're going to push this under the carpet. No, like, speak up. It's important.
Do you think that is that really like, is Hollywood really that open now, or is it just like everyone's kind of pretending to be open?
Oh, that's a great loaded question.
Because I mean, I feel like people are going to do crazy shit all the time, right? And you know, there's probably 100 Harvey Weinsteins out there lurking, right, trying to you know, keep things under wraps. Like, I'm just, because anytime you have rich, talented people and beautiful people all mixing around in the same thing, like, you're always just going to have endless problems. I just feel like it's a whole ecosystem that is just, you know, it's going to cycle through really bad times and then things will get better. But I you know, from the outside looking in, someone who doesn't make feature films, I'm just wondering like how open it really is.
You know, and you know that it's a great question. You know, I want to be the optimist, that I want to think that, you know, people are going to do the right thing. And, you know, has that always worked? No. I mean, like, you see people do the wrong thing all the time. And then you're like, why would you do that? Because you can make films and still do the right things. You can treat people well and make films. Because what's the worst thing is when you're on a set and, you know, and you see this coming out now with Rust and this horrible accident that happened. And then like all these people are now testifying that Alec Baldwin was like just screaming at people on the set, was like anger issues everywhere. And who wants to work on that set? Like, when somebody's screaming at you all the time, I mean, that's a toxic environment. So you can make a film without being toxic. You produce hundreds of thousands of TV shows without being toxic. Yeah. And so you can create things without being toxic. And I think that's the lesson everybody should learn.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I think there's an element of people who think like, if you're going to make something really creative, you have to kind of go outside yourself and be toxic or be super aggressive or be angry all the time in order to like find that creative edge. But I don't think you have to do it at all.
I think, like, you know, on a set, you get tired, everybody gets cranky, so that's always going to happen. But, you know, like these really like, you know, because I worked in the studio system and I saw like abusive behavior, and you're just like, and, you know, as a young attorney, you're like, wow, that's not cool. But you're the like low person on the totem pole. So, you know, if you say something, they're like, oh, this person. So it was hard to say things before. I think it's like when you get older, it's easier to say things. Like
a whistleblowing culture is a little bit better out here.
I think it has become, because people don't like, you're not going to have as much of the backlash, I think, as you did. But it doesn't mean you're not going to have backlash. And that's the problem. It's still not as open as you wish it would be, because you still hear these things coming off of sets. And then the whole underground, like, you know what TV shows you don't want to work on because you hear the whole cast and crew. Because, like, this is what producers, like, need to know. It's like, they're like, I had no idea that, you know, my TV talk show was toxic. And you're like, well, the rest of Hollywood did. Like, how did you not know? Or it's just like, they knew, they slid it under the carpet. And then once it comes out, they're like, you know, in this state of denial. But you're the producer. You need to accept responsibility for your set.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're the producer of a television show and you're also the star of the television show, then the buck stops with you. And if something's going wrong, you need to know about it. And if you don't, you're not doing your job probably.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's funny how like this plausible deniability of just being shitty seems to be something that people try to get away with all the time.
Yeah.
Like, just don't be shitty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty easy. Like,
the fun thing about the adventure shows was, things were always very stressful, but you're always so exhausted because you're always doing lots of miles a day, and you're always kind of out in nature in very like precarious situations, and you were just too tired to argue, too tired to talk, and actually that ended up being like a saving grace, because you're just like, it's not worth trying to argue about something that someone missed 3 hours ago on the trail or something like that. Like, you're just trying to get to the next meal, to the next camp, to the next. There's maybe more of a survival element to it than just trying to, be perfect.
Yeah, and that's why you went for the food and drink episodes after the survival ones. You're like, I want a better lifestyle here.
Well, it's funny. Like, I wanted to. So Anthony Bourdain is by far my television hero, right? Yeah, and I loved him. No Reservations, and then Parts Unknown. But he also had this really nice little series called The Layover, where he would like go to a city for 24 hours, and where do you eat, where do you drink, where do you shop, or something like that. And it was really well, and he would film them in between all his other shows. So I was like, I'm going to come out with this show called The Nomad, and it's going to be me, like what I do in between all the adventures and things like that. And we ended up putting together like 4 really nice episodes right in the summer of 2020. So we got into Europe, and we filmed in like Heidelberg, Germany, which is a beautiful city. We filmed in Valletta in Malta. We filmed in Dubrovnik, Croatia, and we filmed in Kotar, Montenegro. So we were kind of limited because of what was open and what wasn't, and we couldn't film in Asia because Asia was totally closed. But I really wanted to try to bring this back, because I've done 12 months a year of like adventure, and it's too much. Like, it's really exhausting. And of course you have the crew with you, and it's hard on everyone for they have families, they might have wives and children and stuff like that. So it's a lot. So it was nice to kind of try to break it up with doing some urban stuff and then doing some adventure stuff. But that was the thought anyways, but then it didn't really work out because COVID happened, and it was just too hard to move internationally. But maybe we will try to bring that back.
Yeah, or maybe you can do a nomad in LA, because, the one thing I love about LA is, like, you have like Little Ethiopia and Fairfax and all the Ethiopian restaurants, and then you have Koreatown. You have all these like great restaurants in LA that are not the like 5-star that everybody's talking about, that the celebrities at, these like little family-owned restaurants that are amazing in LA that don't get the press that they should. And, but the local community all knows about it. And so maybe you should be a nomad around LA.
I don't know. There's so many people already filming in LA all the time. So I'll be happy to leave and start exploring the world again very soon. I'm just excited about how close we are to like South America, because I think South America is a dream. And I filmed in Peru and Bolivia and Brazil and Argentina already, and those were pretty wild experiences, but there's so much more. I haven't been to any part of Central America, so there's a whole area there I want to film as well. Honduras,
Roatan, which is a little island off of Honduras, is fantastic. And yeah, I went to Peru a couple of years ago, and the food, oh my God, the food in Peru and Brazil, it's like, why don't we eat like that in America? The food's all fresh. They have like fruits you've never heard of here, and everything's like fresh. And I mean, the food.
I remember, so I rode a motorcycle all the way around Brazil. For a show called Tough Rides Brazil a few years ago, and I just remembered like the gas stations were all like, they were really well done. Like they all had like cafeterias where it's like all you can eat, or you can, and I was so worried that the food would be shitty at all the gas stations. So before we were going, we're like, well, do we have to bring our own like mountain climbing like space food where we need hot water and we seal up the package? And the food was so fresh and so good, and the vegetables were so nice at all the gas stations. And you think about the food you get here in the U.S. in the gas stations, everything is like fried or just terrible or packaged, and nothing's fresh at all. And I'm like, well, if they can do it in Brazil, like how hard is it to just, add some thought to the process and keep people who are traveling by road all the time a little bit healthier?
Not here.
Job. So you've got a project coming for the summer, but you're not going to talk about it yet. But you did bring a book.
Yeah.
So this is horror stories by women writers, A Scream in the Night. So this is a series of short stories.
Yeah, so it's short stories all by women. So this is the third volume. So we have had, great success on Amazon. So it's available on Amazon. And so the editor, Raina Young, she's big in the horror community. And I was actually brought into this project by Maureen Whalen, who I've known for many, many years. So this is all a link. They were like, let's get together women who want to write horror, and it's done phenomenally well, and we're really excited about it, and we're hopefully going to do a fourth. Our publisher, Black Bed Sheets, has been the publisher, and they're great. They're great to work with. They do a lot of horror for adults, horror for kids, and so it's been a really exciting project.
Is there anything that you've prepared for this series, these short stories that you think you might be able to stretch out into like a feature or anything like that?
The first one that I wrote on this was it was called The Hello Motel, and that was it's a very dark story, and that I could definitely do a short. This one, the one I did for this, is Bound by Blood and Moonlight. It's a werewolf story, so very teen werewolf type thing, which could actually be a TV series. So that was kind of that. And then the other one I wrote for the second one was called Come Find Me, and that was a camping horror story, which was actually based on a true story, it's kind of, the whole story is really super creepy, but the true story was basically these kids were out camping and they saw all these white arrows, so they were like, hey, let's follow this white arrows. And then,
you mean like on the sides of trees or on rocks?
Yeah, they're like, oh cool, let's follow this. And then they got to this place, and then there was all this blood, and they're like, oh, we're done. And it was like, so they had no idea what happened there or whatever. It could have been animal blood, who knows? But the whole process of, like, when you're a teenager, you're like, oh, this looks cool, let's check it out, da-da-da-da. And then, like, that thought process, it's kind of like the Blair Witch, like, let's go out and, have a fun camping trip, and everything goes horribly wrong.
It sounds like Darwinism to me. I mean, if you're gonna follow arrows in the dark, in a forest, in the night, in a place you don't know, yeah, that your gene pool is limited in its. I
don't know, Ryan. How many adventures have you been?
No, you're just not gonna make it. You're not gonna make it through the night. Those camping horror movies freak me out the most. I can't watch them, like with the cabin in the woods and all this kind of stuff, because it's like way too close to home for me.
I was gonna say, because you're out adventure camping and doing all of that, and and I used to camp a lot, and you creep yourself out. That's part of camping, is you tell the ghost stories, etc. But then every once in a while you hear these like crazy stories of like something crazy happening in a campsite, and you're like, maybe I don't want to camp. Maybe glamping's more my style now.
I remember I filmed in Glacier National Park in the wintertime in Montana, and yeah, I mean, like even without ghosts and ghouls and murder mysteries, like just the bears alone, like freaked us out, because the bears were just coming out of hibernation, because it was like the end of March or early April, and still a lot of snow, but the bears were starting to come out, and we were seeing like bear footprints in the snow, and we all had like bear spray canisters on us. We had to like learn how to use them before we went, and we were there for like 8 or 10 days. I just remember laying in my tent every night being like, I don't know, like, is a bear going to come through our camp tonight? And that was even more, I think that would have been even more terrifying than like creepy people.
Yeah. Because it's always somebody who hasn't been camping. Like, you don't have food. Like, so don't be sneaking that candy bar into your tent, because guess what? That bear is going to want that candy bar. It's like you hang your food. You don't even leave your food in the car, because a lot of times people leave it in the car, and the bear, if they smell something, they're happy to like trash your car to get to food. And at least you were like experienced people, because it's always like that one person who's not familiar with like how bears work. He's going to be your trouble person.
Yeah. Are you going to be working with Paul on your next film?
Yeah. So we're working. Paul's great, because he's a director. He's a cinematographer. He knows how to edit. So he really can do it all. So I'm more the pre-production writer, coordinating those. And then I like physically to be on set, because, that's the fun part.
Yeah.
And then he's really good at doing, like, it's a great cinematographer, great editor. So it makes it easy when you have all those pieces together.
Yeah, no, he seems like a well-rounded storyteller, and he's done so much stuff just on his own, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah,
about hundreds, tens of thousands of hours of television,
yeah,
sports, talk shows, like I did Scream Queens. He did a couple episodes with Ryan Murphy, which was cool.
Yeah, it's wild. It's funny how yeah, it's amazing that the two of you have kind of come from various parts of the entertainment space and then come together to actually like tell stories and to make movies. It's beautiful because I love like the backstory of how creative people find their passion and find that outlet and start actually making stuff instead of just talking about it, and how creative collaborators come together and really make it happen. I think it's like the most beautiful, passionate story you can come up with.
Yeah, and it's great. We have another producer who comes in, Tony Dillistone, who's up in Vancouver. He comes in and helps on projects. So it's great because you need a team. Like, we've always had great cast and crew. Like, we brought in somebody he had worked with on Dr. Phil Roy, and he's this great guy. Nigra, he's just this fabulous guy. And when you get those people on your set and you're like, everybody loves them. And there's a reason, because he knows how to like physically move sets. He knows how to set up things. He's just this like great talent. And I had to give a shout out to him because it's like people on the crew don't get recognized like the actors get recognized, but there's so many great people out there that we just have so enjoyed working with. So, want to give a couple people a shout out.
I think the most underrated thing in Hollywood is that if you're just really good at your job and also really nice to people around you, you can work in this town forever because everyone will remember you, and people will just want to work with happy people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And nice people, because it's like, and let's face it, like it's stressful on a set. Everybody gets stressed out. It's hard. It's long. You're working on like 2 hours of sleep. So if there's just somebody who's genuinely like the nice person, and they bring everybody, and they've worked just as hard, they're just as tired, but they choose like happiness, and it's just like that. It just makes set so much better.
Yeah, choose making people smile versus making people miserable.
Yes. That's going to be our new motto.
Is there anything else you wanted to chat about before we head out? I know you've got a meeting coming up soon, but anything else that you want to talk about or promote?
Not anything, but I have to say this has been so fascinating, Ryan, because you've been in China, you've been around the world. Like, what has been your best, what has been your best filming experience?
My best filming experience. Wow. Yeah, I think, what happened to me is I really wanted to, so I was a journalist for the New York Times. I was a freelance journalist. I worked for many publications. And I was a photographer, and then for some other travel, publishers, I was a writer as well, and then I kind of graduated from that into filmmaking and making television. But when I first started making TV and stuff like that, no one wanted to work with me. I thought it'd be super easy to get into the business, but it wasn't. And then I had to kind of self-fund my first project, which my brother and I, we rode motorcycles all the way around China. We set a Guinness World Record. And then we figured out, what it means to go through post-production and all of those horrors, which was a horror. But then, I got into the rhythm of it, and I really wanted to make a business out of it. So all that was amazing. And I think probably the coolest experience we had. So I think the nice thing about the BBC, when we did our show Extreme Treks at the BBC, they gave us like a ton of freedom. So no one ever asked us to film in certain countries. They just wanted it to be like global, right? So 5 continents, 8 episodes a year. And for me as a producer, I always wanted to find like a really intense physical experience in a really beautiful natural environment. But then it had to have some history to it, right? Like we wanted to have some underlying story of us, following in other people's footsteps maybe. And I think we did this best in Papua New Guinea. Yeah. So Papua New Guinea, obviously a small island just to the northeast of Australia. And there's a trail in Papua New Guinea called the Kokoda Trail. And the Kokoda Trail was a famous battle site during World War II. So the Japanese were coming down from the north. They wanted to take over Papua New Guinea. The Australians were coming from the south. They wanted to make sure the Japanese couldn't take over Papua New Guinea because the Japanese wanted to use Papua New Guinea as a launch pad to attack Australia. So there's this one trail, it's like 100 miles or 120 miles that goes kind of north to south through Papua New Guinea through this one stretch of it. And there was one of the nastiest battles in all of World War II. And it's not something that a lot of people outside Australia know about. So it was great for us to kind of go there and to follow in those footsteps, because the thing about this trail is thousands of soldiers died in this battle, but more soldiers died from the natural environment and dysentery and illnesses from being in nature than actually died from bullets. So it's an incredibly hostile environment. It's very uncomfortable, but it's beautiful. And so we had like 18 local porters from Papua New Guinea who lived along various parts of the trail to join us to move all of our camera equipment on this, beautiful 100-mile journey. And then and we followed in the footsteps, and along the trail there's places that certain events happened. And I did the trail with kind of like an amateur historian who had done the trail many, many times, who was able to point out all these different things that happened in different places. And there's like a full cemetery kind of halfway along the trail. And we were actually there on Remembrance Day, November 11th, like we were filming in that spot. So we stopped and it was just really, really nice. So that was one of the ones I think that we did, because sometimes it's just like balls out nature and like climbing a mountain, like let's go up 25,000 feet and see if we can survive. But then other times we could weave in more of a story. So it was a real mix of both. But I think the Papua New Guinea episode was quite nice.
Can we watch it, or is it still?
No, it's all on Amazon Prime and Tubi and stuff like that. And yeah, there's links for it everywhere. So, but I'll send you some adventure links. But that was one where we really kind of like hooked into the history of it quite nicely.
Yeah, because it's amazing when you like then look back. You're like, yeah, we have all this like modern equipment and like warm clothes, etc. And you're like, those people were going like, with wool jackets and like boots and trying to survive a, territory that they had no. It's always amazing when you look back at where they had like no knowledge of how bad it was going to be, and they couldn't really prepare for it because they were just defending their country.
Yeah, and it got so bad, like in some places, like the soldiers, they would cut the holes out of their pants, like you see babies in China, where because they had such violent dysentery all the time, and they were getting dehydrated and dying because of like dysentery and stuff like that, and like to fight in those conditions would have just been impossible. So that's a real like rite of passage for a lot of young Australians. Like a lot of young people, they group up together like as in their school or in their professional businesses, and they do the Kokoda as like a team building exercise. So but when we did it, we didn't actually see anyone, so it was quite special.
There's something also scary about that when you're out in the nature and you don't see anyone.
But then it's nice because then you have like in the evening you've got the camps with all the local porters, and they're setting a fire, they're cooking. One guy's on playing guitar every night, so like we really got like a really nice kind of experience through it, and being able to do it with the local Papua New Guinean people, and a lot of their ancestors would have supported the Australians during that time, because it was like that. All war is about supply lines, right? So. The further the Australians pushed, they had to keep their supply lines intact, and it was all the local Papua New Guineans who were helping the Australians because they didn't understand the weather and the terrain as well as the local people did. So the locals were huge saviors for them. So to do that trip with them was really beautiful.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Definitely good catch that.
I'll send you some links for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, look, I wish you all the best of luck on your project this summer and on hopefully another round with the book number 4, and give my best to Paul. And when the next project is ready to come out, let's come back in and talk about it.
We love that. Thank you so much, Ryan. This has been so much fun.
Thank you. And look, we even have some production quality. I can go wide up here, and we can shake it out.
There we go.
Very nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you.
Fade to black.
Fade.